Hello, I'm Martin Cole from gardeningstepbystep.com, and this is our short guide to soil. And if you're a gardener, soil is probably the most important thing that you've got in your garden. So that's why it's something that we need to focus on. What we're going to look at in this guide is what soil is, why soil matters, two important characteristics of soil, that's soil texture and soil structure. And we're going to look briefly at improving soil, although that is a big subject in itself and something we'll come back to in future videos. So what is soil? Well, in its simplest terms, the soil is the thing between the rocks in the earth and the vegetation that's on the earth's surface. It's the thing within which vegetation puts down its roots and grows. But what is soil made of? Well, it's made of five things. Firstly, mineral particles, so those are the bits of the rock that the soil is derived from. Organic matter, that's decaying and decayed plant and animal matter. And humus is well decayed plant and animal matter. It consists of water, and the water in the soil is known as the soil solution, and that's where plants get their nutrients from. It's from the soil solution. Soil also consists of air and finally of living things. So that'll be worms, insects, beetles, and then the microfauna, as they're called, things like microbes and viruses. But why does soil matter to us as gardeners? You probably realise it's important. It's the thing that the plants grow in, and the roots need somewhere to anchor themselves to enable themselves to stand up straight. But beyond that, soil is important because the type of soil that you have determines the plants that you can grow, and it also determines how well what you do plant will grow. And it's so important that it can make a huge difference to the type of things, to the type of landscape that exists. So, along with factors such as climate, soil will make a difference between a landscape like this, which is lush and green, and in fact in an area of rich volcanic soil, and this, which is barren, scrubby, where the soils are thin and impoverished, and where the variety and the strength of growth of the trees and the plants is quite limited. And that's all down to soil. So let's look at some important characteristics of soil. The first one is soil texture. The thing is, all soils are not the same. And the reason that they're not the same is because in different types of soil, each of the soil components that we talked about earlier are present in different proportions. And also because the mineral particles that the soil is derived from themselves may come from different types of rocks. So you're going to get different kinds of mineral particles in soil which is derived from, say, sandstone, than you will from soil derived from shale, which is the type of rock that will produce a clay soil. And also because in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, different areas where different soils arise, there will have been different plants and different animals, different animal matter going into the makeup of that soil. And their soil can also differ because different processes of soil formation will have taken place. Some soils will arise from the weathering of rocks. Some will arise from the process of water eroding rock and perhaps washing it down into a riverbed and then a river valley. So all of these differences give rise to different types of soil. And soil texture is really a measure of the size and the proportions of the different particles in the soil. So the soil texture varies because of these differences that we've identified. Really, to keep it simple, what we can say is that soil texture can be a line between sand and clay. So on one end you will have sand, very sandy soils. On the other end you will have clay, heavy clay soils. And in between that you will have different combinations of all those different soil components, which will give rise to soil which is more or less sandy, more or less clay. And in the middle what we have is what's called loam, which is really the ideal for gardeners. It's a kind of a balanced composition of all the important soil components, and one which best promotes plant growth. That's not to say that other soils can't do that, but that in many respects is what you might be looking for if you're looking for your ideal soil. But what difference does this make? Who cares about whether or not your soil is sandy or whether or not it's full of clay? Well, the different soil textures give rise to different soil characteristics. So, as you've probably guessed, you know that sand is gritty and it doesn't hold together. It falls apart. It falls through your fingers when you hold it. So, sandy soils, because of that characteristic of sand, are what we call open, and they're free draining. So the water will drain through sandy soils, and with the water, so will go the nutrients. Whereas clay soils are what we call closed textured. The particles stick together, and so when it's wet, it can become sticky and can even become waterlogged. But conversely, when clay soil is dry, it can set hard. So you can imagine that the reason this matters is because it's going to affect the way plants grow, and also because some plants prefer some types of soil and some plants prefer other types of soil. And yes, in a way, plants can express a preference, because if you look at plants like succulents, cacti, Mediterranean plants such as lavender, rosemary, and many of the other herbs, they need free draining soil. They need soil with a pretty high sand content, because if you try to grow them in a heavy clay soil, they wouldn't thrive, and in fact they'd probably die. So in that respect, those plants are expressing a preference for that particular type of soil. Other plants such as potatoes or bananas, they need soil which is heavier and richer, which is not so free draining, more water retentive. But most plants like the middle ground. They'll like a moist but free draining loam. If you've got that kind of soil, you'll probably be able to grow most things. Now, the second important characteristic of soil is what is called soil structure. We've talked just now about soil texture, the amount of sand and clay in the soil and the amount of the other components. Soil structure is all about how the different components of soil are combined. Because what these components do is combine to form what are called aggregates or crumbs, or if you look in your garden, lumps. Look at the little lumps of soil that are all bound together. And these crumbs will have spaces in between them. And it's the existence of these crumbs of soil and the sizes of them that determine the type of soil structure that you have. So let's look at this in terms of what's good soil structure and what's poor soil structure, so that will help to explain this more fully. Good soil structure is where you have small crumbs. You might be looking at something like, 1 to 3 centimeters at most. And these crumbs will be well bound together, so that if they're subject to heavy rain or wind, or when they're dug, they're not going to break up. The crumbs themselves are not going to break apart and turn into dust. And by virtue of that characteristic, what it means is that you're going to have lots of spaces and channels between these crumbs of soil, and that means that the water, which is essential for the plant growth, and the roots themselves can penetrate down into the soil. And this characteristic also means that air can penetrate into the root spaces, and air is important for plant roots because plants which are submerged in water will not thrive and will die. except for certain specialized water plants or bog plants. And by virtue of the fact that there are lots of spaces within this type of soil, the roots themselves can grow easily. So they can spread out well, they can spread their roots down quickly and easily without expending all their energy in trying to do that, which enables them to expend more energy in their top growth. And this type of soil will allow water to easily be made available to the roots, but also to drain away and hence not waterlog the soil. So that's good soil structure. Now looking at poor soil structure. Poor soil structure will generally lack these small crumbs or aggregates. Poor soil structure will be hard and compacted, or conversely consist of large lumps. So it might be a sort of sheet of hard compacted soil, or just a kind of bed of big lumps of soil. And this type of soil, it's poor soil if you can't easily dig it, or it may be easily eroded by rain, water or wind. And poor soil structure, as you can imagine with those characteristics, means that plant roots, air and water can't easily penetrate into the soil. So we've looked at good soil structure, we've looked at poor soil structure, we've looked at the different types of soil texture. Now what we as gardeners often do is look to try and improve the soil that we've got, because what we've got in our gardens may not be necessarily ideal, and we can improve soil. And the best and simplest way to do it is to add lots of organic matter. So we're looking here at compost, particularly home produced compost, leaf mulch, mushroom compost, any organic matter which will break down or is in the process of breaking down, or preferably has broken down quite significantly, if added to soil, sandy or clay, will always go to improving the structure. And the reason that it does that is that it's the organic matter in soil that enables the other components to bind together. So the addition of organic matter is going to promote that action of combining to form the small aggregates that we want to see in good soil. Now if you've got particularly sandy soil, you can improve that by just adding some clay topsoil. Now this isn't necessarily easy or always cheap, but it is a way in which you can improve your sandy soil. Add some clay soil to it, and you can do that in a way that it will make a difference. Now that's sort of in contrast to the position with clay soils, because if you simply add some sand to clay soil, it's not going to make any difference, and that's because of the way that the individual soil particles in clay soils are structured. They are such that just adding some small amounts of sand or grit is going to make no difference, because it will just be lost within the clay. The only way you can make that work is by adding substantial amounts of sand or grit, which isn't always easy. You can also improve clay soil with the addition of gypsum, and that will work because of the chemical composition of clay soils, and gypsum will react to that to break up the clay and to promote that combining action that we talked about earlier to give us the aggregates that we need. So those are some of the ways that soil can be improved, and fundamentally the simplest and best is to just keep adding organic matter to clay soil, or to any soil, because of the importance that organic matter has in the action of combining soils. But in any case, we're going to come on to this more in due course in future videos, but that gives you some ideas of what you can do. And as I said at the start, the soil in your garden is probably the most important thing you've got, and it's something that the more you nurture, the more it will repay you in your gardening efforts. And it's not a one-off process, it's an ongoing process, but it's pretty satisfying, because you can make a difference to the soil and therefore to the things that you grow, whether or not we're talking about ornamental plants, trees, or vegetables. So more in another video. I hope you've enjoyed this one. This is Martin Cole from gardeningstepbystep.com, and I'll speak to you again soon, I hope.